Have you ever wondered what kind of soul God receives without hesitation at the moment of death? Have you ever asked yourself whether heaven looks first at achievements or at something far more hidden? And have you ever considered that the people most quickly welcomed by God are often the ones the world barely noticed? Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals a truth that overturns human expectations. The soul God welcomes immediately is not the most impressive, but the most surrendered. Saint Faustina Kowalska. Some souls pass from this world into God's arms without fear, because they learned how to trust before they learned how to prove. Subscribe if you wish to understand divine mercy more deeply and prepare your heart for eternity. In the Diary of Saint Faustina, Jesus speaks repeatedly about the moment of death, not with terror, but with tenderness. He reveals that death is not the same experience for every soul. For some, it is a passage filled with peace. For others, it is filled with confusion and fear. The difference does not lie in how much they accomplished, but in how they related to God while they lived. Faustina records Jesus saying, in essence, that he comes to souls at the hour of death exactly as they learned to approach him in life. Those who trusted him, even in weakness, recognize him immediately. Those who relied only on themselves struggle to let go. The souls welcomed by God the moment they die are not perfect souls. They are humble souls. They are souls who knew their poverty, souls who did not defend their pride, souls who ran to mercy instead of hiding from it, souls who trusted God more than they trusted their own goodness. Faustina herself feared death at times, but Jesus taught her that fear dissolves in the soul that lives in trust. He told her that at the final moment, he does not come as a judge to the trusting soul. He comes as a savior already known. Imagine a soul leaving the body quietly. There is no dramatic struggle, no inner resistance. The soul recognizes the presence of Jesus because it has lived turning toward him daily, especially in weakness. This soul does not argue, it does not negotiate, it does not cling, it simply surrenders. This is why Saint Faustina emphasizes confidence in divine mercy above all else, not confidence in virtue, not confidence in spiritual discipline, confidence in mercy. The souls welcomed immediately by God are those who throughout life whispered silently, Jesus, I trust in you. They fell and returned. They failed and trusted. They were weak and did not hide. They suffered and placed everything in his hands. Faustina teaches that God does not measure souls by human scales. He looks at one thing only, whether the soul learned to trust his mercy. This is why some souls cross the threshold of death as if crossing into a familiar room. They are not afraid because they are not meeting a stranger. They are going home. Saint Faustina Kowalska makes something very clear in her diary. The moment of death reveals what the soul has practiced throughout life. Death does not suddenly transform the heart. It uncovers it. The soul meets God carrying the same interior attitude it cultivated day after day, trust or resistance, humility or self-reliance, surrender or fear. This is why some souls are welcomed by God immediately. They have already learned how to let go. Faustina records Jesus explaining that many souls fear death not because of judgment itself, but because they have never learned to abandon themselves fully to him. They struggled to remain in control. They relied on their own strength. They kept parts of their heart closed, and so when the final surrender arrives, it feels unfamiliar. But for the trusting soul, death is not a shock, it is a continuation. Think of how a child falls asleep. A child who trusts does not resist sleep. They do not fear losing control. They relax, surrender, and rest. The soul that learned trust in life enters death in the same way, gently. Saint Faustina writes that Jesus told her the souls most quickly welcomed are those who lived in truth, not the appearance of holiness, but truth of heart. They acknowledged their sins without excuses. They did not justify themselves. They did not compare themselves to others. They did not pretend to be strong. They lived honestly before God. Such souls know their weakness, but they also know God's mercy. And because they know mercy, they do not panic when they stand before him. They recognize his voice. They recognize his gaze. They recognize his love. Faustina describes Jesus as approaching these souls with tenderness, not severity. He does not overwhelm them with accusations. He does not enumerate failures. He draws them close because they already belong to him interiorly. The world often believes that the souls welcomed immediately by God are those with extraordinary deeds, visible sanctity, or impressive spiritual lives. But Faustina reveals a quieter truth. God welcomes those who were small, repentant, trusting, and sincere. Souls who confessed often. Souls who returned quickly after falling. Souls who did not delay conversion. Souls who lived mercy toward others because they needed mercy themselves. These souls are not shocked by God's holiness at death. They have lived facing it daily. There is also something important Faustina emphasizes. The souls welcomed immediately are those who did not despair. Despair is the greatest distance between the soul and God because it denies his mercy. Even repeated failures do not separate the soul as much as the refusal to trust forgiveness. This is why Jesus repeatedly told Faustina that confidence in his mercy is the key to salvation. Confidence does not excuse sin, it prevents despair. It keeps the soul turned toward God even when ashamed. At the hour of death, this orientation matters more than anything else. The soul that trusted mercy in life trusts mercy in death. The soul that ran to God in weakness runs to him in the final moment. The soul that learned surrender does not resist being taken. Faustina teaches that heaven is not surprised by such souls. Heaven has been waiting for them. Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals that there is one interior quality that prepares the soul more than any other for the moment of death. Humility before divine mercy. Not humiliation, not self-hatred, but the quiet truth of knowing who you are before God and trusting who he is toward you. The souls welcomed by God immediately are those who stop defending themselves. They no longer argued with their conscience. They no longer negotiated with grace. They no longer justified their faults. They simply placed everything into God's hands. Faustina writes that Jesus showed her how many souls delay peace at death because they still want to explain themselves. They want to prove they tried. They want to balance their failures with excuses. But heaven does not require explanations. It desires surrender. Humility is what makes surrender possible. To be humble is to say internally, I have nothing to offer you except my need for mercy. And this sentence opens the heart completely. Faustina learned this lesson through her own interior struggles. She saw her limitations clearly. She experienced fear, discouragement, and weakness. But instead of hiding these from God, she brought them into the light. She allowed mercy to touch what pride would normally protect. This is why Jesus trusted her with such profound revelations, not because she was strong, but because she was transparent. The humble soul is not surprised by judgment, because it has already judged itself with honesty. It has already admitted its poverty. It has already accepted that salvation is a gift, not a reward. Imagine a soul standing before God at death with nothing to hide. There is no panic, no scrambling, no inner resistance. The soul does not cling to past merits or fear past sins. It simply bows inwardly and allows mercy to speak. Faustina emphasizes that this humility must be practiced in life, not invented at death. Souls who learn to accept correction, who admitted fault, who asked forgiveness quickly, who lived without masks, find death familiar rather than frightening. They recognize the voice of Jesus because they listen to him daily. They trust his mercy because they relied on it daily. They let go because they practiced letting go daily. There is also a warning hidden in Faustina's message. Pride delays peace. Not because God rejects the proud, but because pride resists being received. A heart that insists on self-sufficiency struggles to be embraced. A heart that clings to control struggles to surrender. But humility loosens everything. Faustina records Jesus saying that even souls with many sins can be welcomed quickly if they approach him with true humility and trust. The weight of sin is not what delays the soul. Resistance is. This changes everything. It means the path to a peaceful death is not perfection, but honesty. Not strength, but surrender. Not spotless virtue, but complete dependence on mercy. The souls God welcomes immediately are not those who say, "Look what I have done," but those who say, "I belong to you." They have already let go of the world interiorly. They have already placed their lives into God's hands. They have already learned how to be small. Saint Faustina Kowalska makes another truth unmistakably clear. The souls welcomed by God the moment they die are those who learned to live mercy, not only to receive it. Divine mercy does not stop at the heart that accepts it. It flows outward. And the way a soul treats others becomes a quiet preparation for how that soul will meet God. Faustina writes that Jesus showed her how closely mercy given and mercy received are bound together. A soul that truly trusts divine mercy cannot remain harsh, cold, or unforgiving toward others for long. Not because it is perfect, but because it knows how much it depends on mercy itself. These souls were not flawless in relationships. They were not always patient, they were not always gentle, but they were repentant, they returned quickly, they softened instead of hardening. Mercy shaped their interior life. Imagine a person who has been forgiven much. That person carries a different gaze, less judgment, less pride, less urgency to condemn. Faustina understood that souls welcomed immediately by God are those who learn to say, even silently, "If I live by mercy, I must give mercy." Jesus told Faustina that the soul who refuses mercy to others builds resistance within itself. Not because God withholds love, but because the heart tightens, and a tight heart struggles to be embraced at the final moment. But the merciful heart is already open. These souls practiced mercy in ordinary ways. They forgave small offenses. They withheld harsh words. They excused weaknesses. They prayed for those who hurt them. They resisted bitterness. They chose compassion over resentment, often quietly, often unseen, often at a cost. Faustina describes Jesus teaching her that the measure the soul uses toward others becomes the interior measure of its own trust. A merciful soul learns to rely on mercy instinctively, so when death arrives, that instinct remains. The soul turns toward God the way it always has, with openness, not fear. Think of the moment of death as the soul's final movement. Souls trained in judgment tend to turn inward, to defend, to retreat. Souls trained in mercy tend to turn outward, to receive, to surrender. Faustina emphasizes that mercy is not weakness. It is truth lived without cruelty. It is justice tempered by love. It is strength that does not need to crush. And this matters at the hour of death. The soul that practiced mercy does not fear being measured harshly because it has learned how gently God measures. It recognizes the face of Jesus immediately because it has tried to reflect that face to others. There is a deep peace in such a soul. No bitterness clings, no unresolved hatred binds, no refusal remains lodged in the heart. This does not mean the soul lived without wounds. It means it did not build its identity around them. Faustina teaches that heaven welcomes immediately those who learn to live as channels of mercy, however imperfectly. These souls do not argue at the threshold of eternity. They do not resist love. They simply allow themselves to be received. Saint Faustina Kowalska reveals that another defining mark of the souls welcomed by God at the moment of death is how they related to suffering. Not whether they suffered little or much, but whether they surrendered suffering into divine mercy instead of carrying it alone. Suffering is unavoidable. Resistance is not. Faustina writes that Jesus showed her how many souls suffer twice, once because of the pain itself, and again because they refuse to entrust that pain to Him. These souls hold suffering tightly, trying to understand it, control it, or justify it. And this clinging creates fear, especially at the hour of death when all control must be released. But the souls welcomed immediately by God learned something different. They learned how to suffer with Him. These souls did not romanticize pain. They did not seek it. They did not pretend it was easy. But they did one essential thing. They offered it. Faustina often wrote about her own physical and interior sufferings. She experienced illness, loneliness, misunderstanding, and deep spiritual darkness. Yet again and again she records Jesus teaching her that suffering united to His mercy becomes light instead of weight. The key was not endurance, it was surrender. Imagine two souls carrying the same burden. One tightens, resists, questions endlessly. The other lifts the burden and quietly says, "Jesus, I trust you with this." The burden does not disappear, but the heart softens. fear loosens, peace enters. Faustina teaches that the soul that practices this surrender throughout life does not panic at death. Why? Because death itself becomes the final offering, not a loss, but a handing over. These souls learned early how to let go. They surrendered unanswered questions. They surrendered disappointments. They surrendered wounds that never healed. They surrendered plans that never came true. So when the last moment arrives, they recognize the movement immediately. This is the final surrender I have been practicing all along. Faustina records Jesus saying that souls who suffer with trust draw extraordinary mercy upon themselves, not because suffering earns salvation, but because surrender opens the heart completely. A surrendered heart has no resistance left, and resistance is what delays peace. The soul that clings to suffering clings to control. The soul that offers suffering releases control. This difference is decisive at the moment of death. Faustina describes that Jesus approaches surrendered souls with gentleness, not urgency. There is no struggle, no inner protest. The soul does not ask, "Why now?" It simply rests because resting has become familiar. There is also a quiet transformation that happens in such souls. Suffering no longer isolates them. It softens them. It teaches compassion. It deepens mercy. It strips away illusions of self-sufficiency. These souls do not face death as strangers to weakness. They have lived in it, with God. That is why they are welcomed immediately. They do not fear losing strength, because they learned long ago that strength was never theirs. They do not fear judgment, because they entrusted their wounds to mercy. They do not fear surrender, because surrender became their refuge. Saint Faustina Kowalska returns again and again to one decisive truth. Confidence in divine mercy determines the soul's passage into eternity. More than fear, more than suffering, more than past failures, it is confidence, or the lack of it, that shapes the final moment. The souls welcomed by God immediately are those who learned how to trust without conditions, not trusting because they felt worthy, not trusting because they had achieved holiness, but trusting because they knew who God is. Faustina records Jesus saying that distrust wounds his heart more than sin itself. Sin can be healed, weakness can be forgiven, but distrust closes the door, and at the hour of death, a closed heart struggles to receive what God is endlessly offering. Confidence is not denial of sin, it is refusal to despair. The confident soul knows its misery clearly, but it knows God's mercy more clearly. This soul does not look at itself in the final moment, it looks at Jesus. And because it looks at him, fear dissolves. Imagine the final breath of such a soul. There is weakness, there is uncertainty, there may even be fear at the edge, but deeper than fear, there is familiarity. The soul recognizes the gaze of Jesus because it has lived under that gaze for years. It has returned to mercy too many times to doubt it now. Faustina writes that Jesus told her he delights in souls that trust him at the last moment, even if their whole life was marked by struggle. One act of sincere confidence can outweigh years of resistance, not because God ignores justice, but because mercy is his greatest joy. This is a staggering truth. It means that heaven opens not to the flawless, but to the trusting. These souls practiced confidence daily in small ways. They returned quickly after sin. They did not remain trapped in shame. They refused to believe God was tired of them. They placed their failures into mercy instead of hiding them. Confidence became their instinct. So when death arrived, they did not suddenly need to learn how to trust. They had already practiced it hundreds of times. The final surrender felt like the continuation of a familiar prayer. Jesus, I trust in you. Faustina makes it clear that this prayer is not a formula. It is a posture of the soul. A soul that lived this posture is not shocked by eternity. It enters it gently, like stepping into light. There is no arguing, no clinging, no inner bargaining. Only openness. The confident soul does not ask, have I done enough? It asks only, do I belong to you? And because the answer has been yes for so long, the transition is peaceful. This is why such souls are welcomed immediately by God. There is nothing left to resist love, nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, only trust remains. Faustina teaches that divine mercy is always ready, but it is confidence that allows the soul to receive it fully. And confidence is not built at the last second. It is formed in the quiet, repeated choices of everyday life. Every time you return to God instead of hiding, you prepare for that moment. Every time you trust mercy instead of despair, you soften your passage. Every time you surrender fear, you learn how to let go, and so, when death comes, it does not feel like an end. It feels like arrival.